Welcome back once more to the most featureless room in my house, though I do appear to have a plant over there. Anyway, so today's lesson will be kind of short. Going to talk about the immediate causes. What happened in the late 30s or even early 30s that led directly to the Second World War. Now you may be thinking, McDowell, geez, how many lessons are we going to do on the start of the Second World War? Well, technically, remember those last ones were more of like a segue, almost like a gradient from one color to another for you who are artistic among us. Today's stuff is going to be the immediate. This is clearly what caused the war. There's no debate. This is what happened. So it's going to be a short lesson, as promised, but it will be important stuff. Okay, we're going to start this lesson and our lesson on the war itself, which might surprise you, out in the Pacific. Now, Japan had been expanding for many years, from Meiji Restoration and modernization, to conquering Korea, to beating up on Russia, and they began to see themselves as unique amongst Asian peoples and really unique in the world. They started to see the West as a threat. And it's important to remember, you're going to hear me say this again as well, Japan is very heavily dependent upon oil from foreign sources. And a lot of those sources were located in their backyard. A lot of resources, not just oil, but rubber from Southeast Asia, various guano deposits out in the Pacific, all of those were found in European colonies, which were way closer to Japan than they were to their European home countries. So the Japanese really do begin to fight these wars primarily for resources. That's really strongly argued by a lot of historians who are far more knowledgeable than I am. In fact, some historians, I do not necessarily agree with this, argue that part of what really set off the Pearl Harbor attack was an American oil embargo, which was put on Japan because of the fact that the Japanese were brutalizing the Chinese, to whom the Americans had closer ties than Japan. That's debatable. There was certainly still room for a peaceful solution after the American oil embargo, but again, that's partially my bias. I am an American looking at this. Hate to plug him again, pretty sure I did already in either the previous lesson or the next lesson. Sorry, I'm not filming these in order. But Dan Carlin's podcast, Hardcore History, is currently doing one on the Pacific. So if this is the thing that interests you, you should really listen to that. The first target of Japanese expansionism in this new wave of Japanese expansion is China. And those of you who know population figures or who have looked at a map recently might be going, wait a minute, China's huge. Why would Japan think that they could take them? Well, remember, China was divided up amongst a lot of warlords. It was not very strong. That political downfall and weakness that had eventually led to the collapse of the Qing dynasty, that had only kind of slowed down in the early 20th century. So in 1931, the Japanese are successfully able to invade Manchuria, taking away that northernmost chunk of China and establishing a puppet state that they called Manchukuo. The League of Nations pretty much said, bad Japan, why would you do that? Shame on you. And Japan, the Japanese delegation, kind of calmly shuffled their papers at the League's meeting in 1933 and walked out. The League of Nations was a toothless body. They didn't have the U.S., they didn't have the Soviet Union, they didn't have some of the more powerful nations on the planet, and as such, they couldn't do anything about Japanese aggression or the Japanese withdrawal from the League. Japan still wanted more of China's territories and resources, and in 1937, July of 1937, they launched a full-scale invasion of China. This is a complex and extremely violent conflict that will eventually be joined into the Second World War. A lot of historians, more modern historians like myself, actually include that as the start date of the Second World War. That's a little bit too radical for a lot of people, and I understand that. But there you have it. So Japan invading China is a big deal, and it was done primarily for resources. Italy, which had been looking at the League of Nations and realizing that they weren't limiting the Japanese, begins to kind of follow its own aggressive policy. In 1935, they invade Ethiopia and successfully conquer the African state. They gain a huge chunk of territory. They commit war crimes using mustard gas. They butcher badly overmatched. This is not 1894 at Adwa. This is badly overmatched Ethiopian troops are mowed down by the Italians, who do commit war crimes, including the use of mustard gas. Yes, the Ethiopians do slaughter some Italians and some Italian askaris, colonial troops, that they get a hold of, but the Italians kill huge numbers of Ethiopians. And once again, the League of Nations kind of feebly swats at things and says, we don't like you doing that, but they can't do anything about it. Over in Western Europe, Nazi Germany was following a pattern of expansionism that was pretty much destined from the word go to cause conflict. We don't have the time to go into all of Nazi ideology. Large chunks of it were jaw-droppingly evil, cartoonishly so. Some of it was outright stupid, I'll be honest with you, like comic book stuff, and that's not hyperbole. But through the 30s, one of the big ones, one of the ones that was stressed very heavily, was that the Nazis wanted Lebensraum for the German people, living space. The idea of gobbling up enough territory for Germany to ensure it had the land and food to feed the German people. But that land and food, if you look at any map of Europe, had to come from somewhere, and it was going to come from Germany's neighbors. And through the 30s, the Nazis start to defy the Treaty of Versailles in multiple ways. They rebuild an air force. They start to put together tanks. They start to have an army of larger than 100,000 men. And the eventual allies, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, they don't do very much to confront the Germans. They don't want another world war. Their people are still traumatized by the first one. And this leads to a policy called appeasement, which quite frankly is very, very complicated and very, very difficult for me to explain. There's a great video posted on the Canvas that does a good job of explaining the rationale behind appeasement. It is not as black and white as you have probably been told. Germany does begin by annexing majority German territory, which sounded like they were following Wilson's self-determination thing. Hey, Austria speaks German and they're ethnically mostly German, yoink. Hey, we want this German majority territory called the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. And Britain and France didn't want another European war, so they agreed to give Germany the Sudetenland without asking the Czechoslovaks. And as you can see on the map, that was when the wolves set in. Poland, who will be the victim in the Second World War, they tore off a chunk of territory. That's what that bit labeled 2 is. Hungary took 2 majority Hungarian pieces of Czechoslovakia, and the rest of Czechoslovakia was either gobbled up by the Germans later on, I believe in 1939. Yeah, March of 1939. And the rest of Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, was made into a very small protectorate state. So this appeasement clearly failed to prevent war, but to say that it failed entirely is to have the argument that it was designed to prevent war. Again, watch the video in Canvas before you start sending me any sort of angry emails saying that I'm somehow pro-appeasement. Just understand that, like most historical concepts, it's complicated. All right, so the next target of Adolf Hitler's aggression was Poland. Now, you could argue, you shouldn't because it's an insane argument, but you could argue that the Germans were at least justified through the principle of self-determination to take Austria and the Sudetenland. You can't argue Germany had any claim to Poland. It's full of Poles. It's got almost no Germans in it outside of the East Prussia and Danzig corridors. And if you don't know what that means, congratulations on your social life. Now, the Germans are preparing to invade, and Britain and France, they basically say, all right, Poland is where we draw the line in the sand. If you attack Poland, we attack you. Hitler doesn't believe the promises, especially after the Munich conference, where Germany had gotten what they wanted from France and Britain for basically nothing. And German forces invade Poland on September the 1st, 1939, popularly considered to be the start date of World War II. Britain and France do declare war upon Germany. They do try to help out their Polish friends, not allies, but friends. And the war is now a massive global conflict as of September 3rd of 1939. Hey, I made it under 10 minutes this time. Thank you guys for sticking with. I will see you all tomorrow in our weird little digital space. Bye.